Guard base. This is our first online meeting only in quite a while, but I appreciate you all coming out. I want to remind you that this meeting is being recorded, and that is the recordings are actually put onto YouTube later. So just so you're aware. Johanna, can go ahead. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so I'm Amy Brand. I'm your facilitator. I'm with Jacobs, and our agenda may shuffle a little bit because Bill Meyer is in transit. He's the remedial project manager for the National Guard Bureau. So we're going to start with some online meeting logistics to kind of remind us, and plus WebEx has made a few small changes. And we'll do I'll introduce the team briefly who's on tonight's meeting. We'll have a co-chair welcome from Lieutenant Colonel Tom McGuire and Ed Lawson. And then we have a little bit of time set aside if there's anybody from the community who is not a RAB member, who has any particular questions or things that they want to ask up front before we get started. We have a little time for that, and then we'll get into our discussion of the environmental projects. We may put the PFAS-PFOA RI presentation ahead of the outside projects presentation. So that's where we'll see whether we need to shuffle based on whether Bill is still driving or not. And then we'll do public questions, and then we have a time for RAB business, and we'll adjourn. We do have a very full agenda tonight, and I'm going to try to keep things rolling, but I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask their questions as well. So let's move on. Go ahead. That's me, Amy Brand, facilitator. So I'm going to start with the WebEx meeting logistics. I'm going to ask people to please introduce yourself. We not only are recording this meeting, but we also have a court reporter online who will be doing a transcript of the meeting, which goes into the administrative record. So when you're speaking, please introduce yourself. Our typical structure of RAB members can unmute themselves to ask questions at the end of each presentation. And I kind of ask people to observe a time limit to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. For members of the public from the community who also may have questions, again, I mentioned that we have a brief time at the beginning that you can ask those questions, and we'll go ahead and unmute you to ask those questions. And then there'll be time at the end of the meeting. But what I'd like to ask you to do is go ahead and type those questions into chat. I'm going to show you in a minute how, but type your questions into chat so we can address them at the end of the meeting. Anything that we can't get to before the meeting ends in those chat questions, we'll send out written responses afterwards. Next slide. It's a delay on my end and turning this page. Okay. So in general, we're going to keep videos off just to help save bandwidth, with the exception of who's speaking. I'm not going to police that. If you want to put your video on, that's fine, but it just will probably help a little bit. If you want to see who the participants are that are on the call, in purple down there on the lower right, I've circled participants. Just click on that and you can see the list of people who are on. To ask a question, again, RAB members who can unmute themselves during the question period, you can raise your hand to be called on, and that there's a little hand there circled in blue at the bottom of the screen, and then unmute yourself when called on to speak. Again, public participants, other than at the very beginning, you can use that chat feature to type your question. That's circled in green at the bottom. And type your question in there where it says write a message and send that to everyone. I'm going to ask that the chat only be used for questions, not for chatting, like offline conversations would be during an in-person meeting. So next slide. Okay, if you're on the phone calling in, I hope that you have a copy of the presentation or can see it. And we've emailed that out ahead of time. You can use your phone mute button when you're not speaking. You can press dial *3 to raise your hand to be called on to speak. There is no way for people who are on the phone to type into chat. But again, I'd like you to observe if you're a RAB member. Do we have any RAB members who are on the phone only? You can unmute yourself and identify yourself right now? Okay. So in that case, then, folks who are on the phone, if you could just make sure that you ask your questions during the beginning public part or at the end, that would be great. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in terms of RAB members, our community representatives are Ed Lawson, John Clark, Jay Beaumont, Kyle Conway, Stephen Bedetti, and Mike Shade. And I think we have, I think Ed's on the call. I know Mike said that he was sick. And then we do have some of our other, oh, and Jay said he was going to be, he had another PFAS related meeting tonight, actually. Our community group representatives, I am seeing, I know Jennifer Rollison is in that Newburgh community room there. Jennifer, are there any other RAB members with you? You can unmute yourself to let us know. Earlier she said no.
No, there aren't.
Okay, thank you, Jen. I see Chuck Thomas on the call. I'm scrolling up and down. So I know, I think I saw Dan Shapley too.
Here.
Thanks, Dan. Jen Benson is on. Okay, and in that vacant there for City of Newburgh, I have just learned tonight that we have Ramona Monteverde, who is now going to be representing the City of Newburgh. So
Here.
thanks for joining us. Thanks
Yeah.
for joining us, Ramona, and welcome. Appreciate
Sure.
it.
Thanks.
Steve Gagnon is on the call. And I don't know if I see Patrick Hines. Again, I'm scrolling up and down as I look. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, and the team on the Air National Guard side, from the National Guard Bureau, we have Keith Freihofer and Bill Meyer, and Bill is on the phone while he's trying to get to his hotel before it's time for him to present, and I do see Keith on the call as well. From the base, your RAB co-chair is Lieutenant Colonel Tom McGuire, and he'll provide us with a little, he'll speak in just a minute. I'm Mike Ottinger is the environmental manager, and then Dan Hodder is from Public Affairs. Representing the Army Corps of Engineers, Tom Hines and Dennis Powers. Representing the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is Justin Starr and Kristen Kulo from the New York State Department of Health. And then the teams are supported by various contractors. I think most of it, all of us now. Doug Close will be presenting, as will Walt Howard, and I'm Amy Brand from Jacobs. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Tom McGuire and to Ed Lawson, our co-chairs.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. I will keep it brief for the sake of time. I just wanted to thank everybody for the work that went into the post-award session a few weeks back. I think it was well done. I will stop there at talk, and always happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, Ed.
I'll keep it brief as well. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this important conversation. We're excited to have this discussion, and we look forward to hearing what has been going on, and also to track some of the seminal issues that we would like to address. For example, the TAP application and the community action plan, the community involvement plan. So I'll turn it back over to you, Amy, and thank you all again for joining. And then welcome again to Ramona Monteverde. Thank you for your service. We'll give it back
Thank
to
you,
you,
Mr.
Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Johanna, while you go to the next slide, I want to acknowledge that John Clark, RAB member, is also on the line. I was scrolling up and down looking while we were there. So now this is the time for anyone from the public, from the community, who has any questions that they would like to see addressed about the environmental restoration program at the base. So you can use the chat feature to type your question, or you can go ahead and raise your hand. I'd like to keep things brief, but if there's anybody that has any questions they'd like to address right now, please let us know. Yes, Ramona, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just saying
Okay.
thank you to Ed Larson.
That's from
for the
before.
work.
Okay, no problem. And that's and her hand's raised, I think, from before. Thanks. All right, I am not seeing any comments right now, so we'll move on for the sake of time, and please, again, just put your questions in the chat as we move forward. Okay, so now we are moving to the updates on environmental projects, but I suspect that Bill is not yet at his hotel. So I want to jump ahead to, I think, Bill, you could speak to the PFAS, PFOA, RI slides without seeing them in the beginning, and then it goes to Walt. So we're going to jump ahead to slide number. I'm sorry about this, folks. Bill's plane was delayed, so he didn't get to where he needed to be in time. Slide number 25. Just trying to be flexible on the fly. Okay. All right. So this will be the PFAS, PFOA, RI presentation with Bill Meyer. Again, he's the Restoration Program Manager for the National Guard Bureau, and then Walt Howard from AECOM. Go to the next slide, Johanna. And Bill, I'll tell you what's on the slide and then you can speak to it. I think you know these. This is the general conceptual site model slide, Bill.
Yeah. So with the conceptual site model there, if you can see where the question marks are on the slide, where the water is, the bedrock interface, down gradient from the base. Those are things that we're trying to get answers to when we're collecting the data for the investigation. So we did an initial phase where we moved out, collected data. Right now, we're on our second mobilization where we're stepping out to collect information to fill in those data gaps. And then from that, we will use the data to basically try to figure out what we need to do next. So once we get done with this next field mobilization, Walt will talk about where we're at with that and where we're going. Yeah.
Okay.
So
all right, thanks.
On to the next slide. Yeah.
Go ahead, Johanna. Okay, so this is the RI status update. It might be easier if Walt does this because he can see the bullets.
Let's see. Hi, Amy. Can you hear me okay? Or
We can hear you fine, Walt. Thanks.
yeah, I can't seem to restart my video.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. Don't worry about that. You can.
Good evening. Go ahead. Good evening, everybody. I'm Walt Howard. I'm AECOM's project manager for the PFAS RI. This first slide here, this is just a update of the status for RI, which the RAB requested after the last July meeting. So we'll just go through the bullets here. To begin, we began mobilization 2 in May 2024 under DEC and New York State DOH approval of our draft UFP QAP addendum. And then mobilization 2 was temporarily halted in mid-July as we had some right of entry agreements for neighboring parcels to the base that were still hadn't been executed. Then the Army Corps was able to execute a new ROE with New York, New Jersey Port Authority for continued work at the Stewart Airport property. That was executed in mid-September of this year. So then what we're calling mobilization 2B, we splitting this into 2A and 2B. We resumed 2B in October with soil sampling. We did quite a bit of soil sampling in October. And then right now, monitoring well, remobilization of our drilling contractor and beginning monitoring well drilling and groundwater sampling. We're anticipating that to resume in early December. That's after once we get the Port Authority is able to get FAA permit approvals for the rig to operate on the airport. We have the UF2 CLAP addendum. It is still draft, but we are working to finalize that now. Now that the ROEs are pretty well settled out. We'll be wrapping that up, and then once it's approved by DEC, we'll get it loaded to the admin record right away. So that'll be later on this fall. And that's pretty much it for where we're at right now. We can, I guess, next we have figures that, have an update of the status of the RI. These are all figures that, some of them haven't changed since the July RAB meeting or the October poster board. So I won't spend a lot of time with them, but we'll go through each one.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
And while Johanna is switching to that slide, I want to remind two things. One, for anybody who doesn't remember or is new to joining us, a UFP QAP is essentially a very detailed sampling plan of what will be sampled, when, and where. And also, as you're viewing online, there is above the map, you should be able to see 100% with a plus or minus sign. So if you want to zoom in on that map, you're able to do that. And finally, just if everybody could keep themselves muted when they're not speaking. All right, with that, Walt, go ahead.
Thanks, Amy. So this figure is just a summary of our overall Mobilization 2 locations, locations that have been they're planned and those that are completed. Let's see. And really the only change in this figure, the green dots are those that have been completed. The purple dots are those that are yet to be finished. The only change in this from the July RAB meeting and the poster board session is this shows an additional 63 soil borings that were completed in October. So that's so that's about it with that. It's just showing all of our locations. You can see a lot of the surface water locations that are off well to the south, all the way down to Moodna Creek and so on. Next figure, please. This figure shows the planned Mobilization 2 groundwater sampling point locations. These include both existing wells and the new temporary groundwater sampling points and permanent bedrock wells that we're installing in Mobilization 2. The red dots are those are the Mobilization 1 groundwater sampling points that were completed, just for reference. And so you can see that we've stepped out, we're stepping out to, on base around a lot of wells, but then we're also moving off base around the perimeter. This figure, this has not changed at all since the July RAB meeting or the poster board session. The blue lines, those are ISO concentration contours for PFOS in groundwater, PFOS concentrations in groundwater. This, generally represent, the groundwater plume and the overburden, which is the soil above the bedrock zone. But this has not changed since the last meeting. So I guess we can go on to the next figure. This figure shows our proposed and completed Mobilization 2 soil sampling locations. Again, the green dots are those that have been completed, and the purple dots are still remaining. You can see since the October poster board session, we've completed quite a few locations. An additional 63 borings were completed in October. I guess we did a bunch more around the retention basin, some around Wreck Pond, and then we were able to complete the ones on the Stewart Airport property to the west near Building 142, which is a former satellite firehouse, and then just to the north of the base, former nozzle testing area. Okay, we can go to the next figure, please. This figure shows the plan mobilization 2 stormwater sampling locations. This has not changed. We haven't completed any of the sampling yet. This will be upcoming. Everything is just so dry right now. It's just pretty much not able to do any sampling, but we're ready to go as soon as the time comes. So, but this figure hasn't changed at all since the July meeting. These points are essentially all the same locations that were sampled during mobilization 1. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is our shows our mobilization 2 surface water sampling locations. And again, this figure has not changed either since the July RAB meeting or the poster board session. It shows our mainly the red triangles are mobilization 1 locations that will be resampled during mobilization 2, and then the green triangles, and they're pretty hard to see on this figure, I know, but there's a few of them that are spread further downstream along Silver Stream down to Moodna Creek, and then a few off to the east. Those are new mobilization 2 sample locations that we've added. So, and I guess if I didn't say this is unchanged. We haven't conducted any sampling again. It's just, with the drought conditions, there's not much water to sample at this point, as Doug will point out with his stormwater treatment system update. So, we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the next figure. So this is the updated RI schedule. And so with the additional ROE delays this summer, we needed to push back the completion date for mobilization 2. We're anticipating to being able to complete it now by early next year, hopefully by February of 2025. At this point, we think, we're still hopeful that we, will not have to push back the completion of MOBs 3 and 4. We'll have to expedite some things to get that done, but we're still hopeful we can do that. So the remaining portions of the schedule 3, MOBs 3 and 4 and beyond that aren't changed from the previous schedule that we presented at the July RAB. And then the next figure, please. Next slide. So this figure was prepared at the RAB's request to provide additional information on the scopes of mobilization 3 and 4. And this is really, so mobilization 3, that includes the, installation, development, and initial first round of sampling of an additional approximately 60 permanent monitoring wells. They'll be installed in both overburden and in bedrock at both on-base and off-base locations. Locations will be, dependent on the results of mobilization 2, and the, expanded conceptual site model, the further development of the groundwater model for the site. So, but those will be, being scoped as soon as the data is in and validated, and we can begin to scope those. So, and then mobilization 4, mobilization 3, that also includes the lysimeter study, installation, and first round of sampling of lysimeters in areas of identified soil contamination. And then, if required, there'd be a round of private water well sampling. And then following up on that, mobilization 4, it's planned to include additional round of groundwater sampling for the new and previously existing wells, a second round of lysimeter sampling, and then if needed, another additional round of private water well sampling. So that's pretty much it on the detail of that. I guess that's it. If there are any questions, Amy, do you want to?
Yep. Okay. So this is a chance again, just a reminder for RAB members to raise their hand and ask any questions about the presentation you just saw. And the public, if you're not a RAB member, please just go ahead and put your questions or comments into chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the meeting. So please raise your hand. Any RAB members with any questions on the RI presentation? I'm not seeing any, but if I'm not seeing your hand and you have it raised, just go ahead and unmute yourself, RAB members. Oh, Dan, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Can you explain what the thresholds would be for testing private wells? You indicated that was a possible, but not sure thing. So could you just talk a little more about when and how, the decision would be made to sample private wells?
That may be a question for Bill.
Yeah.
Bill, are you available to answer that?
Yeah, I am. So,
Okay.
talking about, are we going to sample private wells? Is that what the question was?
Right. That's what would be the threshold, or on the slide it said, sampling private wells if necessary, and the question is, what is the threshold, or what would make that necessary?
Oh, well, one, I know the health department, and I believe they're online, they sampled residential wells in the area. I'm not aware of any residential wells that have been sampled that are above the the standard, because everyone's been hooked up to water, I'm assuming, because no one's. So if the health department's on, if they can answer, about the sampling that they did in the area, and that's probably the better way to go. But if we do have wells, we know that there's wells that are there that haven't been sampled, and they're down gradient from the plume. We would definitely go out and do that sampling, and I know that's part of AECOM's scope of work. They had there's an option on there for doing residential well sampling, but we haven't seen a need right now to do that because we haven't seen any residential wells that are down gradient from the work that we're doing right now. Now, that's not to say that can change, but so if the health department's on, if they want to chime in on that.
Kristen, do you have anything to add?
Hi, yeah, this is Kristen. So many wells have been sampled in the area, and we sampled all the way until we're not detecting anything. So in all the areas, actually, my predecessor did that. So we stepped out until we were non-detect in several areas down from the base, from the south of the base. And at this point, we know of no other reasons to be sampling other private wells. If something came up during the scope of the investigation that where we said, we're finding contamination in an area we haven't already investigated, or there's new lines of evidence that we need to be looking at things, we're always taking a look at that. Right now, we haven't seen anything new to alert us that we need to be actually doing additional sampling.
Thanks. And
Okay.
can you just clarify what level of contamination in a private well would trigger the installation of a POET filter for that home?
So currently, we're still using the 10 part per trillion. That is the what is the New York State drinking water standards. And so we use those to guide for private wells as well. and that would be our threshold.
Thank you, Kristen. Any other questions from RAB members on the RI presentation? Okay. All right.
Bill,
I think. Oh, sorry.
Fetter
Bill
has
Fetter.
hand up.
Go ahead. Sorry, Bill.
Oh, that's okay. Couple of questions. One, the health department testing to date, is that publicly available on somewhere? And excuse my ignorance if it's obviously been stated. And the second question is another kind of given question or self-answered. The ISO contours on concentrations on groundwater sampling will be adjusted, I'm sure, as additional data comes along. Is that fair to say? Thank you.
Okay. Kristen, if you could answer the first question, is that information publicly available on the well sampling?
Yes, that information is publicly available. The areas that were sampled, the map, we have a map that shows the areas that were sampled and how many homes, how many residents in those areas that were sampled, and what the different kind of categories of detections, how many were non-detect, how many were above. I'd have to look at that. I'd have to look at the breakdown. So they're given in general terms because individual homeowner results are private. But we do give, an overall snapshot for every area, and that is publicly available. And I can get that link to Amy.
That'd be great. Okay. All right. And I think Bill's second question was asking whether the groundwater, the PFAS isobars on that map will be updated as the RI continues. Walt?
Yep, this is Walt Howard with AECOM. Yep, Bill, once we get the Mobilization 2 groundwater analytical results back from the lab and validated and, reviewed and compiled, they'll be used to update a groundwater model that we have for the site. And then that information will be used to regenerate the ISO concentration contours. So they certainly will change to some degree. So, but yes, the answer is yes.
Great. Okay. Any other questions from RAB members before we move on? Okay. I'm going to buy Bill Meyer a little bit more time by moving on to the interim stormwater treatment system presentation. Okay, Doug?
Sure. Let me get my video started again. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Doug Close with Bristol Environmental Solutions. We're here to report on and talk about the interim system from the period of July through September, otherwise the third quarter of 2024. Next slide, please. Turn up my volume a little bit. General updates for that period. The runtime for July through September was 95%. So the system was, automated and adjusted for both some early rains during the period, and then, of course, for the longer, drier periods that we started to see middle of July through August, and then certainly into September and currently. The media was replaced early, mid-July, from the 9th through the 18th, and part of that media changeout was a complete change of all the sands, both the fine and the coarse, all GAC and all resin were exchanged. We had a maintenance scheduled, and we replaced 3 vessels for 1 train. Train B was completely removed. You'll see some photos later in the presentation. And we do this as we inspect the vessels if we see any kind of sign of corrosion or wear and tear as a preventative action, so we don't have any kind of failure while operating. So we're going to be looking at doing another change out of train C in our next scheduled media exchanges, currently going to be in the month of December. Gallons treated for the quarter, 35 million, and that total is now at 615 million gallons since putting the system online in July 2020. Next slide. Couple photos, we can just see the new vessels coming in, vessels being exchanged and reinstalled into the container number 1 structure. Next slide. The configuration, which most of you are familiar with, those that did attend the poster board session, you also saw these vessels in cross section. If that helps you to remember, the flow of water begins on the left-hand side of your diagram where the pump and the ultrasonic equipment are in the pond. The water flows through a centrifugal separator for large separation and then goes into our fine and coarse sand filters, discharging from that container into another container where take the filters.
Yeah, why not? So these are the last ones. So we finish out these ones, then they're all
Excuse me, if everybody could mute except for Doug, I'd appreciate that. We're getting some background sound. Thanks. Doug, continue, please.
The water flows through the sands, through the bags, and then splits in 4 equal parts for each of the treatment trains, A through D. Highlighted in the configuration was train B. Those were the vessels that were exchanged. Next slide, please. Our quarterly sampling results, it's always important for me to point out the scale on the left-hand side of this split chart. If we look at the left-hand side, we're looking at the influent PFOS, PFO levels coming in from stormwater inflow, indirect pond. That left-hand side is in 100 to 500 parts per trillion. So you can see the average over those 13 weeks was 318 parts per trillion. Likewise, on the right-hand side, the effluent, after being treated and going through our complete interim system, the parts per trillion are from non-detect to 10. And you can see 3 detections over the 13 weeks, July 9, 23rd July, and then again on 13 August, all below 2 points parts per trillion combined, PFOS and PFOA, for our average for the quarter. Next slide, please. In an effort to address some questions that have been coming up about treatment and comparison of treated water discharge versus the overflow water that can't be handled by the interim system. This is our first chart that looks at this quarter, July through September. In the greenish, lighter shaded part of your bar, that is what we treated. We've taken our gallons treated, we've converted that into a percentage to help us match the percentage of water going over the weir. So for example, on July 1, we are treating roughly 60% of the water coming in, roughly 40% of the water is getting by us. So light green on water treated, dark blue for water bypassing. The white line is a graph of the total rainfall that we measure and then chart across to just overlay the treatment volumes. Next slide, please. Then to take a bigger year to date, and when I say year to date, this year, January 24 through September 2024, you can see where in the winter months, the first 4 months of the year, we are at a much higher percent of bypass versus the light green, which is our treatment. Then with the drying season, summer season, especially this season, being below normal, you can see it start to move in the other direction where we're handling the treatment in a large percentage of the flow coming into the pond. You know, a smaller percentage is getting biased with bypass. Again, with the rain chart graphed across the top. That's your white line. Okay, next slide, please. Another one of the questions asked recently was, is the water that is high flow more concentrated or less concentrated with influent PFOS and PFOA? We had one data point that shows on July 23rd that you have a very low concentration in parts per trillion of influent PFOS, PFOA, with a lot of rain happening over about a 4-day period. So that water flowing in this case was much lower than our average of 318. It was, at least for that data point, was below 200. Conversely, we see something similar where we had an event on the 20th of August. We had just a minor amount of rain over a 2-day period, and the concentration stayed about average. So, not definitive, but it is, that data point on the 23rd sort of addresses that in many cases, heavy stormwater inflow going over the weir is being, probably diluted by the amount of flow based on that data point. Next slide, please. And as we get through the summer and now the fall, I've taken this photo in October when I came out for the poster board session. I'm on the western side of the rec pond, looking back towards Stewart and the outfalls in the far distance. And you can see the exposed sandbars, the shallow nature of the water. A lot of this water in the foreground here is probably 1 foot or less and trapped in many places by contour changes in the bottom of the pond. Next slide will show you some more photos of the current conditions or conditions recently. If you take a look at the upper right-hand corner, it says the overflow of the pond, or the overview of the pond. You can see the right-hand side, that's where I was standing looking back towards that vehicle. And that's the exposed, that's typically all under several feet of water. And that's all draining back to about 2/3 of the footprint of the pond. You can see also in the bottom, as we look back towards the outfall structures, how low it's gotten. The stormwater inflow has gone from about 200 GPM in the middle of the corner to probably 100 or less, probably less than 100 gallons per minute coming into the pond right now. So the pond is roughly 15 inches below the weir, and we're having excellent results continuing as we go through October and into November. We still are tracking with non-detections in the effluent as far as November 5th. And we're probably looking to change the media around week 20, which will be the first week of December. I think there's one more slide. I got a little bit ahead of myself. What we also have been talking about with the group is the fluctuation of flow. The maintenance is a big part of how much flow, how many GPMs, when the system's running. We have many versions of both automatic and manual backwashing that happens throughout the day. The first bullet will tell you that the sand filters are automatically backwashed every 3 to 4 hours. That's critical to keep that clean and going. Backwashing can reduce the treatment flow by about 10%, a lot of times less. But some of the effort to be offline and focus on backwashing will degrade the flow. Bag filters also are a big part. This is a real pressure restriction. When we start to have clogged back filters, our only response to that is get them exchanged. So sometimes we'll have to adjust to prevent any damage from the back pressure or complications. So we are always constantly watching what's going on at the bag filters. And then, of course, your media is periodically backwashed to keep the mitigation of media fouling under control and keeping the sediments moving from the media bed so we can get that absorptive reaction from all our medias. On-site conditions such as storms will lead to the team to lower the GPM. When we're either in a low condition like we are now, based on the pictures you saw, or a very high flow, our immediate reaction is to go to half of the flow. We're always pumping at 250 GPM, whether we're trying to treat a low, drawdown situation or during a high flow over the weir. And that the flow that we're regulating now with these low levels, we're really focused on a 14-inch level. We still have a good clean water column. We are creeping that down to 15 and 16 now to see what we can do. But we know from history, as we get to the 18 to 20 inches below the surface of the water, you're taking up so much sediment, it's like shoveling pond right into your media vessels. So we'd be very careful of that to make sure that the media doesn't get fouled. So those were some of the questions that was brought up in July and other RAB meetings. So I hope that answered a few of the questions.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I did get a comment that you were still a little bit muffled, so I hope that people are able to hear you okay. Are there any questions from RAB members? I see Bill Fetter has his hand raised. Go ahead, Bill.
Doug, looking back at the influent and outflow contaminant levels, why the more recent values, you haven't had a breakthrough in quite a while, and why is that versus looking at some of the historic values? It came more frequently, it looked like. I don't know if we could go back to that slide.
Yeah, I think I can answer your question. It really will come down to the amount of gallons treated. Because of some of those conditions that I was talking about, a low water level will treat less. During normal and higher, we're always trying to go at 500 GPM. Right now, we don't need to do 500 GPM. We'll put ourselves in a problem. So the answer to your question is the number of gallons treated. That's why we've extended it longer.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Other questions from RAB members? Jennifer? at Newburgh Community. I'm assuming that's Jennifer.
Yeah, it's me. So I was just curious, I missed when those photos were taken when it was dry. If that was more recent, was there any testing of the silt or the ground area there at all?
Not by Bristol. No, is the question, is the answer. Those photos were taken in October.
Are there plans where if there's that situation that you could take opportunity to do so, or is there no need to? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a good question for the other arm of our group.
That would be for Bill Meyer. I don't know if you are able to answer that question, or
Yep.
Walt. Bill, that'd be great if you could go ahead. Good.
Yeah, I mean, part of the RI, we had sediment sampling down as we did that as part of the first phase. And I think when Walt did his update tonight, I mean, one, they weren't sampling surface water because of those dry conditions, but I think I know that we were going back and recollecting some sediment samples in that. I just don't know if they're in the areas that are exposed right now or not. Walt, you'd have to let me know on that. I mean, sediment sample's a sediment sample, whether it's underwater or it's just recently, dried. So I don't know how that corresponds to locations within the RI that we've done.
So, Bill, I'm hearing that there's no need to take advantage of those dry conditions to jump out there and take a sediment sample. That you just move forward with what's planned and spelled out in the sampling plan for sampling sediment.
We've got data points, but if there's, I think there's data points for this second mob, but Walt may have already collected them. So I'll let Walt answer that.
At this point, so in mobilization 1, we collected I think 20 sediment samples across the bottom of the wreck pond. They were collected from a boat. We compared all the results to the previous SI and ESI sediment sampling that was done in the pond, and there were concentrations were very similar. Everywhere we sampled, they were very similar to previous sampling. So at this point, we do not have sediment sampling planned under mobilization 2. That is in the draft final QAP addendum. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I mean, the data from what we have to date is very consistent with historical data. So
it sounds like we got it characterized, is what we're saying. So there's not a need. There's no data gap that we don't know the left or the right limit of. We took we basically saturated the bottom of the pond, and the results were comparable to the SI data. So no, it doesn't sound like any additional data is needed right now. I mean, because we already compared and verified that we got it characterized.
Okay, thanks. Bill Fetter, do you have another question?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. Any other questions from RAB members? Okay, and just a reminder to folks who are not RAB members, if you have questions or comments, please put them into the chat. Okay, and Johanna, at this point, then we'll go back to slide 11, which was the start of Bill Meyer's presentation. Bill, I hope that you're able to see the slides now.
I am. I'm logged in.
Excellent.
Live.
Thanks everybody for being flexible with Bill's travel and shuffling the agenda. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with Bill's updates.
Okay, so updates on outside projects. There's the DOT 17K project we're going to talk about. Also the critical process analysis, where we're at with that, and then also an update on the PFAS fingerprinting. You can go to the next slide. Okay, it doesn't talk about the 17K, but 17K, here's the update. We received other courses of action for the 17K diversion. Right now, the Air Guard is in internal discussions. We're reviewing those, and we're trying to set up a meeting to talk with DOT about those courses of action. There's probably probably 2 or 3 meetings that we're trying to set up to talk about it, so we can select what we think would be the best COA for the diversion. So we're reviewing those. Once we look at those, and then we come up with a recommended course of action, then we'll work with DOT on that, and then it'll be in DOT's hands to move it forward. And I know DOT has their own separate public involvement process, but that's kind of where we're at right now. So as soon as we get see what those alternatives are in that, and then we select one, I believe DOT will give a presentation to the RAB, because we were ready to do that before, but they had some issues with some of the other COAs that were presented. So that's kind of where we're leaning right now. And I'm hoping maybe by January, or when the next RAB is, we can be able to do like a DOT update to the RAB. That's my hope. No guarantees on my side. Yeah.
Can you just, what is COA? What does it stand for?
Course of action.
So a reminder to all presenters to try to minimize acronyms when we can.
Sure.
It's hard when they become a regular part of their language. Chuck Thomas, I know you have your hand raised, and this is not necessarily a time for RAB questions, but do you have something on the 17K project before we move on to the critical path analysis?
Only a couple of questions. When we met in October, I believe Bill said he had just received the alternatives, and he hadn't really had time to look at them yet. And I'm wondering if you've had that time, and what kind of time frame you think on making those decisions that you might be looking at.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying to set up a meeting at the beginning of December, and there's another meeting on November 22nd that I'm trying to set up.
That's with
so we
DOT?
got to have the internal discussions first, to look at it, and then from there we'll move forward. So we're not waiting a month. It's trying to get everyone's schedule coordinated. Can be complicated.
So I understand the November meeting is with in-house, with your group?
Yep. November, both of them in-house. We got 2
both of them.
in-house.
And then December was the second one. So one November when?
22nd.
22nd, and then the December one in-house again, not with DOT.
Yeah, it's either the 2nd or the 6th of December. We haven't nailed it down yet, but yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned that the DOT has their own public involvement process. Could you
they always
on that?
No, they've always done that. I mean, why do you think we've been waiting for them to present to us? It's because they do their own process.
I've never heard of that.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, I think
they have a public involvement process. We have not heard a word about that as a group.
I could have swore we talked about it, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I don't
Chuck,
think so.
I think we have heard from DOT that they were, when we've asked them to make a presentation in the past, they've said, oh, we need to get through process A, B, and C, and then once we get to D, there's a public presentation. So that rings true to me.
So they haven't had one yet?
Correct.
We were going to do one last July, but because they came up with some issues, we didn't want to present something that was going to change potentially. Okay. So they went back out and they collected more data to look at other courses of action as part of their design process. And now they've presented those to us, and now we got to go look at them and come up with a way forward. We're going to pick one and go, hey, this is what we want to do. But once we do that, then you'll get the presentation from DOT. They'll go through what they did and how they did it, and because they were ready to do that in July, we just pulled off because why present something that may not be the course of action that we select. So
I'm a little confused. Why wouldn't there be public input onto that course of action?
I think there is when you go through the DOT's process. I don't
But
know
I
what
mean,
that.
on the choice, you're making choices of what your course of action is going to be, and then they're going to use that course of action, and then they're going to do public involvement, right?
We'll have to ask DOT. But,
Well, this has been a long-going issue with asking DOT much of anything.
Yeah, that is,
And I
yeah,
don't mean to get involved in this, but I think, we need to start hearing more. Now you've got 5, I think you've mentioned 5 courses of action that they're talked about, from slip lining the pipe to doing something else, going somewhere else.
Yep.
And here we sit 2 months later, and it's still being discussed. And when you got the overruns that you were showing in like slide 30 that I guess Walt was showing, you got a lot of water going through the system that's not getting treated. And if we could get that water out of there, it's coming in from DOT, which you've noted as having between 20 and 39% of the amount of water coming into the rec pond, that's going to make a huge difference.
Yep.
And I just feel like this should be kind of on the fast track, not the slow track. I'm sorry, I just be long about it, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
Thank
Chuck,
you for your
I know
answers.
I know it's been frustrating, and we repeatedly ask DOT to come present to the RAB, and like Bill said, they were ready at one point, and then things changed, and so we have to wait for them to be at the point in the process. They have to follow their own processes before they will come present those to us and to that public involvement process. So
Yep.
it's not, trust me, it's not been from a lack of asking them to come present to the RAB.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I think we all look forward to hearing that presentation when we get there.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to the critical path analysis.
Okay. So CPA, this slide, I'm not going to read it to y'all. It's a slide that has already been presented once. It's just kind of an overview of what it is and what they do. So if you got it in your slide deck, if you got the slides, if we can move on to the next slide. So here's kind of an update on where we're at. Noblest Phase 1 CPA report was distributed to the RAB members 10 September, so y'all have a copy of it. Right now, Noblest, they had their contract renewed on 30 September, and so they've started work on the Phase 2 critical path analysis. And the Phase 2 basically provides like a rough order of magnitude cost plus some details on what the scope of work would entail. Next bullet on here is Air Guard and Baltimore Corps. We submitted Army Corps of Engineers put together an independent government cost estimate for us to execute those interim actions. That was the documentation that I needed to do the programming to request the funding. So that was done in I believe, the September 25th. As soon as I got the IGE, I submitted the program adjustment requirement, the PAR, for the new requirements. I submitted it back in August, but we did some tweaking to the independent government cost estimate. But the PAR was received by AFCAC on 25 September. So they've got the cost estimates for the 2 IGEs, or the 2 interim removal actions. And now what we're waiting for is, one, the National Defense Authorization Act. The budget has to be approved by Congress. And then, AFCAC already has an idea of what our cost is, and they need to look at that and, to make sure that whatever budget that they end up getting, then, we'll find out where we fit, within the budget, where their cut line is. So budget first from Congress and then AFCAC. But, because it was identified, we did the CPA on it. I have high hopes that, AFCAC will approve, the budgeting piece for this. But they can't do anything until we get a budget approved by Congress. So that's kind of where we're at with that. So next slide. CPA overview. So these are questions, that the RAB members asked. They wanted a little bit more detail. So, and here, this interim action 1 is at the southern boundary, over by Rec Pond, in between the lagoons and Rec Pond. We're talking about doing a groundwater extraction system. And so that groundwater extraction system would consist of constructing 2 groundwater, or a groundwater trench about 900 feet long by 30 feet deep by 2 feet wide. And we would use submersible pumps and sump crocks to pump water out. So water would flow into that trench, and we would recover PFAS impacted groundwater and treat it. The other part so that's just a general overview of the system. The next bullet is some of the investigation work and the pilot tests that we would have to do to run the system. And so under the pilot system optimization investigation, basically we're going to install a couple groundwater extraction wells, also some additional monitoring well clusters. The well clusters would be at 15 feet and 30 feet. Basically we would basically conduct like a pump test to see how much groundwater we could extract and how that extracted groundwater would react by lowering the water table in the area. So it's basically we would be setting up for a pilot test, but then those monitoring wells can help us with the characterization, and then they can also help us with monitoring the performance of the groundwater extraction trench. And then also part of that, we talked about doing some quarterly groundwater samples from the 14 wells that we installed, in support of this pilot system. We would do a baseline before we did the pilot test, and then we'd do a sampling post pilot test. Here's what the groundwater quality was. So to see if there was if it was making a change. So if you were removing contaminated PFAS groundwater, you should see groundwater quality improve in theory. And then the other part of this, and you can read the bullets on the groundwater sampling, it talks what we would analyze the groundwater for. We'd also do slug testing of the wells that were installed, along with the pump testing, like I mentioned, from the 2 extraction wells, and then basically to see what kind of zone of influence this extraction trench would bring. And then another part of that would be a bench scale treatability study. So some of the pre-treatment processes to see, is it granular activated carbon? We're looking at some other treatment technologies potentially using for this. So that's the pilot system optimization investigation. And then the other part would be the actual pilot groundwater treatment system, building the system. So just like what Doug Close has for treating the surface water, we would have another treatment system to treat the extracted groundwater out there. And if you read the bullets in there, it shows some of the details on what we were looking at, for the system and what it would look like. One of the things we're looking at is the foam fractionation, the SAF, 20. It's basically when you collect the groundwater, there's a remediation technology that'll actually pull out the AFFF out of the groundwater. We're doing it up at Biddle, and it's been really successful. So we're looking at potentially using that up here. So it treats, and then the water, it pulls the foam out of the water, but then we polish off the effluent or the influent coming in. We polish off, we clean it up to discharge the water. So we're actually removing contaminant mass. So up at Biddle, I think we've already pulled off, we're like in month 3 or 4 of a pilot test, and we've pulled I think 20 gallons of foam from the system. And that foam gets sent off site for destruction. So we're looking at doing something similar here. And this pilot system would be operated for 12 months. And, it's just like the interim stormwater treatment system. They had to do a shakedown and evaluate it and collect the data to see how effective it is. And then based upon that, we would, tweak the operation of the system to optimize it, to make sure that we were drawing down groundwater levels and recovering what we needed to reduce what was actually going into Rec Pond. Okay, so that's interim action 1. Next slide, please. Overview of interim action 2. This was the repairing of stormwater outfall A, outfall 2, and outfall 3. The CPA actually recommended doing a cured in place pipe method for repairing the defective stormwater lines. Also, we were looking at stormwater, sewer sediment, and water sampling to segregate and dispose of sediment. So part of that repair process is to pull out the contaminated sediment in there before you repair the pipe. So that all needs to be characterized and for disposal purposes. And then there was also some shallow soil and sediment sampling, and then preparation for storage of that material that we pull out to prepare for the repair, and then the disposal. So that's really what interim action 2 would be. It was basically we're pulling out the sediment, the contaminated sediment, and then we're doing the CIPP, the cure in place to repair the pipeline, and then we're disposing of the sediments that we recovered in support of that repair. Next slide, please. Okay, critical process. So this was a RAB question on here. They talked about, when will additional CPA, hotspots, pathways be conducted at other locations? Right now, Air National Guard doesn't have any plans for additional IRAs at this moment. Doesn't mean that we can't do them, but right now, when Noblest did the site, they did the entire site, and they identified, the top priorities. So these 2 that we're doing right now are priority number 1. It's not to say that if we find something else that we can do it, but I'm hoping to be further along by the time that these IRAs get implemented, that we'll be done with the RI and we'll be doing the feasibility study and actually coming up with permanent solutions. But these things all take time. And then the other part of this was the 17K diversion, which we've already talked about. This is the key component to reduce the stormwater volume entering Rec Pond. That's a part of the, our 3-pronged approach here. And then the Air National Guard, we don't have any plans to upgrade the interim stormwater treatment system right now. I mean, right now it's like bone dry, so we don't have that problem. But in the future, we know that there's going to be more water coming in, but that's why 17K is a kind of a critical part of reducing that volume in there. So the combination of interim actions 1 and 2 and the 17K should reduce that volume in there, and we should be able to keep the pond levels from flowing over the weir. That's the working theory right now. So basically, if you look at the bottom of this, there's 3 bullets for our 3-pronged approach. 1 is reducing PFAS groundwater contaminant mass from entering outfalls A, 2, and 3 by repairing the pipe, because those pipes are taking on impacted PFAS contaminated groundwater up gradient. And then we're also looking at hydraulically controlling and intercepting PFAS groundwater mass from entering Rec Pond, because the pond's interconnected with the groundwater table. And then lastly, reducing the volume of stormwater from entering the pond through 17K diversion, which should significantly reduce the volume of water that goes over the weir untreated. Next slide. So CPA process and timeline. So you asked for what the process was and the timeline. So I broke it out by months, starting with July and working our way forward, just so you can kind of see some timelines. So in July, we had the final CPA phase 1 report. We submitted it to you in September, but it was done in July. Noblest had started the CPA phase 2 report, but the contract expired. Now they got the contract renewed the end of September. I just had a call with them yesterday on, the status of it. So they're working on the phase 2 CPA. I believe they're hoping to have it within a month to me. And then once we do that, we'll have them come do the same presentation that they did, for the CPA phase 1 with the CPA phase 2. So moving forward, September 24, Army Corps of Engineers, I already talked about this. They prepared an IGE for both of the IRAs. I received those on 25 September. Army Corps is also working on performance work statement to support the contracting effort. I submitted the program adjustment requirement to get the new requirement into AFCAC. We did that. I started that in August and got the final number to them on 25 September. Moving forward, December. So in December, we're going to start the ECA, the Engineering Evaluation Cost Analysis for a non-time critical removal action. Basically, this evaluates the different treatment technologies for, the 2 IRAs that we're proposing. And then it also evaluates costs and, other stuff, and it puts it all together, and we do an evaluation of it. And then it'll go out once we get it ready to go to the regulators and the RAB. It'll go out for a 30-day public comment period. And then once we get comments back and respond to that, we will finalize the ECA, which will result in a development of an action memorandum. And all an action memorandum is a decision that documents we selected X interim actions to do an X, and X to reduce mass or to keep from groundwater infiltration from going into the stormwater pipes. It's basically a formal documentation of that process. And then that'll also get submitted draft final to the regulators and folks for review and approval. Next slide, please. The December 24, like I said, we're starting the ECA, the Engineering Evaluation Cost Analysis. February, I'm hoping to have a draft final prepared to go out to the regulators. Once the regulators look at, we'll submit it to them. And then we'll also do that 30-day comment period as part of this. And the hope is that sometime in March, once we get the comments back, we respond to the comments and we finalize the ECA, and then we get ready to do the action memorandum, which is basically the decision document. But I can do everything up to the ECA, but one thing I can't start is contracting until Congress approves the budget. So it's a trick, it's a critical path. Congress has to approve the budget, then AFCAC has to approve what I requested. And AFCAC already has the numbers for me. So I don't know what the budget's going to be. We got a new president, the new government coming in play. So last year, I believe the National Defense Authorization got approved in June. So I'm hoping that it gets approved earlier, but it's kind of out of our control. So in March, I already talked about that. Next slide, please. Going to April, I'll have a draft final action memorandum that documents our interim removal action decisions. And then May, the final action memorandum should be approved. Corps, if they get the money in March or May, they should be able to do a contract award by August. These are just tentative dates right now because it's all dependent on when we get our budget approved. And then I get the projects approved by AFCAC. And then moving on, so if they award the contract in August of 25, it would be October 25 that the contractor will start working on work plans to do the execution. And if I were to guess, if they were able to do that, winter in the fall of 25, do all the planning documents, they should be able to break ground in the winter of 26. Next slide. Okay, so do I want to keep driving on, Amy, with the PFAS, or do you want to take questions on that?
Let's keep going because the PFAS fingerprinting presentation is short.
Yeah.
And then we can get into questions from the RAB on both presentations.
All right, roger that. So PFAS, so the fingerprinting study, status and report timeline. RAB had asked, to get an update on that. So UFP QAP addendum was finalized in September 2024. Contractor mobilized, that's Oneida and Battelle. They're out in the field right now, and they're coordinating with AECOM and the USACE on their sampling activities. DEC had an opportunity to comment on the UFP QAP addendum, and I believe, can't remember, I think we sent the UFP QAP to the RAB. I'm not sure if you guys got that or not. If you didn't, we can get it to you because it's a public document. So the Draft final report for this is tentatively scheduled for October 2025. There was some delays getting out into the field. I believe, the contractor was shooting for like July, August timeframe. So it kind of slid a little bit. So their due date may slide a bit, but the date that's outlined in the UFP QAP is October 2025. And a lot of that depends on laboratory data coming in and being validated and for consumption. And then the last bullet on here, there was a list of questions about the fingerprinting process, and Amy should have forwarded the email on to you all because I had, I think it was Cindy Cash from AFCAC had answered the questions that you had because I couldn't answer them. So you should have that in your inbox. And
yeah, I sent that out yesterday.
Okay. So next slide, I think that's it for fingerprinting.
That's right. So now we'll go to RAB members for questions. That was really the meaty part of tonight's presentations. So RAB members, Dan, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to kick off by thanking you, Bill, for asking, excuse me, specifically answering the questions that we put down. That's definitely the type of presentation that we're eager to see, and I'm really happy you did that. So I just want to start with that. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, I mean, it helps if I know in advance because then I can get you. I don't want to. I mean, if we don't know what you guys want to hear, I'm going to give you what I think you need to hear.
That's right, and that's something we discussed with Ed Lawson on our last co-chair call. Was kind of having a process where the RAB submits those questions before we really develop the presentations. So hopefully you did see in tonight's presentations more of an attempt to answer the questions that have been submitted to us. We want to try to tell you what you want to know. Other questions from RAB members? I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, yes, I am. Bill, go ahead. Bill Fetter.
Hey, thanks. With regard to PFAS testing and fingerprinting, is a year a typical?
We kind of lost you there. We were breaking up, Bill, but I think you're asking whether it's typical to take a year from sampling to the final report. If I'm guessing, that's
Correct.
what you were asking. Okay.
Correct.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that UFP QAP for the fingerprinting is totally different than the characterization stuff that AECOM's doing. AECOM's doing a multi-step process where they're going out, they collected an initial group of data, they're doing step outs, then they're going to put in monitor. It's a phased process. Where this fingerprinting and background study, it was very deliberate. It was it was, we're going to collect X amount of soil samples, surface water, sediment, groundwater, and then we're going to take it back, and then we're going to do our fingerprinting process with Patel and our background study, and then that's it. So it was very specific. It had once they collect the data, I mean, I think collecting the field data, and that's probably the longest tent in the pole to get everything collected. And then once they get the data, they need time to process it and that. So that's pretty reasonable for what the level of effort that they put together. And, knowing that, there were some hurdles that we had to jump through with coordination and right of entry access and a bunch of other things. I mean, in a perfect world, everything would just happen and there would be no issues, but that doesn't happen very often. So I would say, yes, it's reasonable for a year for them to, from the, it took them, they were on contract in the spring. I think they presented in the spring, was it? Spring RAB meeting. And then they got their CLAP addendum, and then they did several meetings with the regulators. The regulators commented on it. And then, they got out into the field. They tried to do it earlier this summer, but, because of issues, they couldn't do it. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Other questions from RAB members? Okay, well, look what happens when we get those questions in advance, huh? Okay. Um, Johanna, now you're going to have to jump slides. Oh, actually, at this point, if there are any questions, this is the time. Actually, we're going to do it before RAB business. If there are any other additional questions from the public, I'm not seeing any in the chat. But if any public participants have any questions on the presentations you've seen tonight, now's the time. And you can raise your hand if you want to, or you can type it into the chat. And meanwhile, Johanna's going to go to, I don't know, you're going to find where we're supposed to be. Moving on to the RAB business, slide 45. There you go. Okay. When will the administrative record be updated online? We're going to actually talk about that during RAB business, so that's coming up. Thank you for that question. Any other? I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll go ahead since that is part of the RAB business. We're going to move forward with the RAB business part of the presentation, which is me and to some extent Bill. So the topics we have for RAB business, and this is sort of like a little mini agenda slide. One is to talk about the technical assistance for public participation, the TAP grant status. It is fall, so it is time to do the community co-chair re-election. That is annual. And Ed Lawson has agreed to continue to serve if you would like him to. And if anybody else has it, is wanting to be the community co-chair, you have about 45 seconds or a minute to decide that you want to throw your hat in the ring. We're going to talk about a little bit about the poster board session, a little discussion about what went well and what should be considered for next year. We're not going to do a super long debrief on that because there is also a separate feedback survey on that. So we'll talk about that a little bit. There was a request to put meeting format restructuring on the agenda. And we're going to talk about the administrative record and base website updates and then go to upcoming meetings. So first, next slide is on the TAP, and I'm going to ask you, Bill, to address that.
Ooh, hold on. Okay, TAP. So the RAB voted on a TAP application in July. It's a RAB meeting. The application was submitted August 15th, although one of the main body of the application was password protected, so it took a while to get it to us. So we have the RAB application. I think we got to do some updates to it to add specific tasks and reports. And I know Ed Lawson sent an email to me asking about what reports could be included in that, and I sent it to him. I think it was like the CPA phase 1, phase 2, and then the QAP addendum for this go around. So what we have to do is we'll get it into the right format and the right level of detail on there, which won't take long to do. And then we need to work with the base contracting folks. They need to reach out to the university for where your TAP grant expert works, and we basically got to put a performance work statement, a scope of work together, and level of effort, and then basically do a contract between the university and the 105th Air National Guard Contracting Office to basically get them on contract to do what you need. So the scope of work for what I envision it being is, your expert's going to review those reports, and they'll do a report for each one, or they'll do a combined report. I mean, we can do it either way. And then once they digest all that and they provide the TAP or they provide the RAB group a copy of that report, they'll do a presentation at the RAB for it. And so that basically will cover, for next year. Every year you have to apply for the TAP grant. So it's not like it's like an open-ended, go ask a question and consult with them. There's a specific scope, deliverables, milestones, and budget, and all that gets, has to be put on a contract. So right now, it's budget dependent right now, because right now we don't have a budget, so I can't do any contracting. But what I can do is I can put the performance work statement together. the independent government cost estimate and the level of effort. I can coordinate with the 105th contracting officer, and then they can reach out to the university and do all that necessary coordination to make sure everything's smooth. And then once we get everything set and it's ready to go, the thing that allows us to get going is the availability of funding. So until we get our budget approved, I don't have any funding, so I can't commit the government to anything because we don't have a budget. So that's in the short of it. And I said that on that bullet. So there's a lot of things I'm going to be able to do to get everything ready to go when we do get the approved budget. And when we do that, the contracting folks will be able to run out and execute. So we've got some time right now until the budget gets approved, but I've already got draft scopes of work from a previous, I worked on the Barnes TAP grant, and I've got their PWS and IG, and I'm going to take that and adjust it to, the Stewart and the reports and stuff. So that's the TAP grant, where we're at. So.
Okay, thanks. Next slide. Okay, community co-chair election. I told you had, Bill, go ahead, Bill Fetter.
Will the consultant have access to the entire administrative record?
Just like you.
Okay, great, thanks.
Public.
Amy, I have a question too about the TAP grant.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to be clear. So Bill, I understand about the budget. I understand about procurement and all of that, but we can move forward with the process. We're not waiting, I guess, until the budget is out before we move forward with the process. Am I clear? Is that right? We can move
Yeah. I can put together all the contracting documents, short of doing a solicitation for a proposal with the base contracting folks. We can get all the documents and stuff together. We just can't do anything. So, your contractor is not going to get paid if they're not on a contract. So if they want to work in advance,
no, it's not working in advance necessarily, but it's submitting the application so that.
Oh yeah, we'll submit the application. Yeah, I got to modify it, and then Colonel McGuire has to sign it. I mean, the base co-chair is responsible for signing it and that. So we got it. We looked at it. I've got some little more detail to add to it. Too easy, but we'll do everything that we can do short of going out to solicit the proposal from the university.
Thanks. I just wanted to clear that up. So appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Ed. Dan, question on the TAP?
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to be clear, Bill, when you say you've got updates to do, I guess we all see it as our application. So we just want to make sure that, I guess specifically where it gets to naming the documents that will be reviewed, or the specific tasks that the contractor will be able to do. We just want to make sure you're not moving forward without having us, make sure that those are right from our perspective.
Right. Well, they're on the slide right here in front of you. There's 3 bullets. That's what I was going to have them review. There, your TAP.
I think, Dan, if I may, I think the issue there is that the TAP application has to be specific as to what's going to be reviewed. And what these 3 bullets that are on the slide, Ed Lawson had sent an email asking what would be available to review in 2025. And these were the ones that that Bill identified to Ed in that email. And if there's something else you want them to review, then my understanding, Bill Meyer, is that it could be added. And they're not going to proceed with that without making sure that Ed is in agreement with what goes into that scope of work, right?
Yes.
Right. So, okay.
Does that answer your question?
We're obviously reliant on you to be complete with what will be available for review, because we can't predict it. And you gave us some good dates on the previous slides to help to set the expectations on those timelines. But just want to make sure there's nothing that's outside of the that's going to come into our hands that we won't be able to tap our expert, unintended.
I think one thing that we could,
that's all. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, one thing we could probably add maybe that would fall in that period that I'm thinking about it now is that the ECA, the engineering evaluation cost estimate, I'm hoping to have a document out there that they could also look at as well as part of this.
Yeah, thanks.
ECA, maybe the action memorandum, maybe, depending on. So we can add those two if you want. That's too easy.
Yeah, again, this is why I want to move forward. I just want to make sure the list is right, but there's the DOT studies too, potentially, although that might be a different set of expert analysis that we might need. Again, just want to make sure there's no report or document coming out that we're not going to be able to have the help of that expert on, given that we have to get it right now. And I think the other thing, I think Bill asked this already, the other Bill better asked this, but it's as long as it's clear that if we have this bullet, let's say for the QUAP addendum, that's the review we're going to get from the expert, but the expert might need to dip into that administrative record in order to find context or background in order to understand something. And just want to make sure that's within scope.
Yeah. That's the AFCAC admin record's publicly available. Anyone can go there and download it. And as long as I got the documented uploaded, and I know we're going to talk about that later. I know the UFP QAP, the original ones should be up there right now. And then I think today we got a bunch of recent additions for.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know that
okay.
anyone can access those documents. I want to make sure that the scope of the work being outlined in this, as summarized here on this slide, it's clear that it's inclusive of that expert dipping into the record as needed to review other documents in addition to the one that might be current. That's all. I'm just trying to make sure that we're clear.
Yep. No, they'll have access to whatever they want to read. I mean, they only have so many hours, though, So, yeah.
Jennifer, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. So maybe it's just me. I'm a stickler for things, little details once in a while. I understand that you acknowledge that the TAP was received in August 15th, but in actuality, we voted in July and it was sent that very day to you, Bill, and some others. And so that's like almost a 3-week pause before there was some acknowledgement. And then there was a pause again for when you were requesting for some revisions. I just want to see if maybe there's perspective there that moving forward when things are sent and received, there's a way to expedite, at least reviewing to make sure what you received is what you needed or is able to be open.
There was back and forth about we were not able to open them, and there were messages back and forth, and it took a while until we were able to get first it was submitted as a Google Doc, which DoD can't access and things like that. And so there were a number of emails that went back and forth until we were able to get a file that we could access.
No, I understand that, but my point is it was sent in July. It wasn't acknowledged that it couldn't be opened until August. Time went by, so that's lost time, whereas if it was a day, 2 days later, that could have been probably resolved faster. That's what I'm trying to say. So,
understood.
Especially because that was in person. Mike was sitting there and emailed it to you at that point. So I just want to make sure that that's being acknowledged, that it wasn't just that it was received in August.
Okay.
We voted on it and it was sent. So those time lapses really do impact moving things along. So
okay,
we need to come up with things to address.
Bill, would that have affected the ability to get it started earlier?
No, because August, we're too late in the year to do contracts at the end of the year. So even if it was July, it would have been a stretch to even get it going.
Okay, so Chuck Thomas asked, so the RAB will be able to see the detailed scope of the specific reports before it's submitted. And so I think what you're saying is you'll be able to see the performance work statement before it's sent out. And you say, please add the other studies Bill Meyer added, including the DOT studies. Bill, are they able to use a TAP grant to review the DOT study? Do you know?
It's part of the project, I would say.
Okay.
It's just a technical document. I mean,
Okay.
we're using it to reduce the volume to help us with the remediation. So I would say, yeah. But, you know, the TAP grant's only for 25,000.
That would be
so you
go
know
back and
they can only, you know, they only have so many hours at a rate that they charge that they're going to be able to do work. So
okay.
so the more documents there are, the less, you know, it's a function of time and budget.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say if more are listed here, it doesn't mean we need to request it in each case, right? The help, but this just provides the opportunity to use those hours on one
Right.
or another
Yep.
of these.
Yeah, and if you don't use it or you don't get to the report when you do the next year's report, you can add it. I mean, you know, there's only, you got to apply every year, so that's something else to keep, you know, your planning horizon for, you know, the next one. Once we get this one all squared away and executed, is, you know, reverse planning to what do you need to, you know, to get the next one into the queue. And
yeah,
just like
so
Bart,
that's a
I
good
mean,
point,
Bart said
Bill.
the same thing.
So for that, to that point, then, when do you need it? March? I mean, you said July is too late, so.
Yeah, July. Yeah, earlier the better. Earlier the better, because TAP grants they don't have anything to do with the money. Well, they don't physically have to do with the money, but having the application in is really what we need. And then I've already got it programmed out. Every year I had money programmed last year, but we didn't get it. And,
yeah.
you know.
So can you then send us an email with the list of documents that you would expect are likely to need review in 2026? Because that would have to go into the application we would need to file by March.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me look at
There's a different month. Just tell us what that month is to make sure we get it to you in the right time frame.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I know we're working on the first one, and, you know, the first one's always the devil's in the detail, right? Getting that first one through the hoop, because after we get through the first one, the next one should be a lot easier. So I'm thinking, you know, like February, March timeframe would be a good time to start getting it in, because you can get it in and you can get it submitted and approved, and then we can, you know, start the contracting documents and that should be enough time to get it done, you know, early summer for the next fiscal year. So you're talking right now, this is for 2025. So we're talking it'd be FY26 submitting, you know, like February, March timeframe this coming up.
Okay. Bill Fetter.
I would think I would want access to the RIFS as well to or to review it, to put the newer work into context. So that should be included, in my opinion.
I think the RI is still a little farther out in terms of when that will be available to review.
Or the earlier studies. I'm sorry if I'm.
Yeah, the ESI. Yep, that's all available.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So that should be accounted for in time allotments.
Okay. Let's move on to RAB co-chair so that we can work with Ed or someone else, whoever you elect, to continue moving forward on these. Is there anyone else that is interested in running for co-chair, or are you happy to let Ed continue to do it? He has graciously agreed that he would be willing to keep going if you want to keep him doing it. I'm not seeing any hands, Ed. Okay. So just to be clear, as per our operating procedures, a community co-chair can serve 2 or more terms if approved by the RAB community members. And by community members, that also includes the community group representatives. It just means not like the base co-chair and the state regulators, that kind of thing. So with that, if folks could please raise their online hands if you vote for Ed to continue as the community co-chair, and we're going to do a quick count. Okay, I am seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hands. Johanna, can you verify that?
Yeah, that's how many I counted.
Okay, all right. And I think that is the majority of who we have on the call. So, Ed, congratulations. You'll continue to serve as the RAB co-chair. Next slide, please. Okay, so the poster board, lots of clapping hands from Chuck Thomas. Thanks, Chuck. So for the poster board session, it is 7:15. I've got an eye on the clock, and I'm actually going to try to get us out of here on time at 7:30 if we can. But I do want to give you a few minutes to talk about what you think went well, what should be considered for next year, if there are things that you want to discuss or change. I just wrote some potential topics on here: timing, the time of year, the day of the week, the time of the day, the length, whether it should replace, just be instead of the fall RAB meeting, or this, like tonight we're having a separate online RAB meeting. The location, the posters, advertising, translation, handouts, staffing, and other. I just threw a bunch of things up there as ideas. There is an online feedback survey. That link is there both as a link and as a QR code. And Emma Kosub from Dawson is on the line to also hear your feedback directly. So again, just as a reminder, Dawson and Jacobs are a team that won this follow-on contract for doing the RAB support, but there is some division of responsibilities between us. And so Dawson did the poster board session. They'll also be doing the community involvement plan that Ed, I think you mentioned, and I will be continuing as your RAB facilitator. So I know that Emma is anxious to hear your feedback, and so I'll let you, I'm going to kind of open it up for, for a few minutes to discuss the poster board session. And otherwise, if you haven't already provided some, please submit your feedback online. Chuck, go ahead.
Thank you. My biggest concern is that the word gets out much sooner. And I know there was a lot of switchover happening this past October or September into October. And I think it's really important that the save the date gets out early if it's October. And I thought it was a good time. It was a good location. I think getting the advertisement out in a concerted fashion would make a big difference. I think the idea of not having the RAB meeting the same night worked well. And I think we should still continue having a RAB meeting, though it could be this type of format as well. Those are my original thoughts.
Okay, thanks. Jennifer?
Yeah, I agree with Chuck. I also would just like to say thank you for allowing us to collaborate in terms of having more community representation, in terms of especially other RAB groups that are, or members of the RAB who, reflect some of the groups in the community. I think that was an important part and worked well. So I hope that we can continue and expand on that aspect of things. I do wonder, I don't know, I guess later we'll find out, the real difference between virtual and if we were to have had a follow-up in person. But that might be something to look at since we're talking a year from now and we like to talk about contracts. Maybe that's something that's integrated into it, being physically together, or if this secondary meeting virtual is okay and hasn't impacted anything.
Okay.
curiosity, does this forum tonight have translation that's being documented, or?
We do not have translation tonight, unfortunately, and that's because of the WebEx platform, as you recall.
Okay.
It was horrendous. Potentially for the future, but it's something we need to test out. We haven't had an opportunity yet. MS Teams, and maybe you have experience with it, I don't know, but I've seen that MS Teams now has a feature where people can still see the slides on the screen, but hear translation separately. But
Okay.
again, I've just heard about this and have not had a chance to test it out again. So that is potentially, we didn't have an opportunity to pull that together, obviously, for tonight's meeting. But that is something that, should we do online meetings in the future, that we may be able to do.
Well, even if we're hybrid, I think since we
Yeah.
went in person, have that already in action, we should be using the technology. But,
I
okay,
agree.
thank you.
I agree. So we're going to be looking into that. Ramona.
Sorry, that was, I just lowered my hand.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Was voting for Ed, sorry.
Oh, gotcha. No problem. No problem. Any other feedback on the poster board session right now? Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward. Next slide. Okay, so there was a discussion. I'm going to do the second bullet first. The administrative record, I know that there's been some concern that it hadn't been updated in a long time. We finally got to the bottom, and there was a plug in the queue somewhere, and I don't even know the details, but I know that a number of documents were updated today, including a year's worth of RAB transcripts. Fortunately, you do have access to the actual video online, and there are some other documents as well. So I think that the admin record, I believe, is up to date as of today. I'm not positive, Bill. I don't know if you know if there's anything else that hasn't been loaded yet. You may not have had a chance to look at it since you're traveling.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple documents. I know the second UFP QAP addendum that Walt's working on, that has to be finalized and that'll be uploaded. But the first one's up there, and I believe AFCAC should have uploaded the fingerprinting one for the site specific. And if they haven't, we'll get it up there. So that's it.
Okay. And then I am working with the base public affairs officer to get updates or to get RAB more to get more RAB information on the 105th base website, and specifically for starters, what we're trying to get the RAB presentations up, just the slides themselves, along with a link to the online presentation on YouTube. And then to the extent that we have them, the posters. So those are the, and then going forward for upcoming meetings, there would be the flyer and the announcement, and when it's ready, the RAB presentation, the same as when we send out to you. Okay, so meeting format restructuring. This is something that I was asked to put on the agenda, and I am not leading the discussion about this bullet. So I'm not sure what the topic is there. So just to, while somebody gets ready to hopefully to raise their hand to tell me what we're talking about, we have done some meeting format restructuring over these last couple meetings, as I think you know. As we discussed last time, we have split the time for public questions and put some at the beginning of the meeting and then time at the end of the meeting as well. So there is time for the public to ask questions at the beginning of the meeting. And then in addition, as we mentioned, we're working with Ed to make the presentations and the agenda more targeted on the specific things that you all really want to know. And the way we're doing that is the RAB submits questions that Ed will get to us. And then we have an agenda planning meeting between the co-chairs. So those are the changes that we have been making in terms of restructuring. So instead of just here's an update because that's what we think you want to hear, we're trying to target the presentations more specifically to your questions. Is there something more that you wanted to discuss there? Okay, I'm not seeing.
I can try. I'll
Okay.
try and summarize what I've heard from other RAB members on this, but I think there was another RAB in another part of the country that has a kind of a two-part meeting that's longer, or it might be on 2 different days, but there's a technical meeting, I think they call it, and then more of a discussion meeting as well. So that was one thing that I know some members were interested in discussing as a potential way to, I guess, address the fact that we've come to in many meetings where we run out of time for questions or discussion because of the length of time it takes to make the technical presentations. I don't know if other RAB members might want to chime in there, because I know others had some other thoughts on this besides me.
So that is something that was brought to us when we had our RAB agenda planning discussion with Ed. And there was a little bit of discussion about that 2-day RAB, which is the only base I have ever heard of having that of all the many RABs and I looked it up, and of course, it's not that I didn't believe you, I just was wanted to see what they're doing. And but in our discussion with Ed, where we landed for now was trying to do this much more focused agenda. So is there any more discussion on that right now? Or Bill, did you want to chime in on that at all? Or Ed? Okay, well, seeing none right now, I guess we will we'll try to keep working with this more focused format and restructuring, and hope that that this will be more effective for everybody and keep our meetings more on track as we go forward. It's 7:27. Let's keep moving. Next slide. Okay, so just upcoming meetings and communications, and these are summaries, but I wanted to point out for our upcoming meetings. Our operating procedures our meetings are set to be the 4th Wednesday of the month. You may have gotten used to it being the last Wednesday of the month. It is the 4th Wednesday of the month, and a lot of our months in 2025 actually have 5 Wednesdays. So I wanted you to be particularly cognizant of these dates. The only one that is not the 4th Wednesday of the month, and this is, we do this every year, is we push back the January one by 1 week to allow some extra time because of the holidays. So these are the dates for 2025 for our RAB meetings, and these will all be in person or hybrid meetings, back to our regular, well, I guess to be determined on October. So the other ones for sure will be our regular hybrid meetings in person. And then just a reminder on sending RAB related messages to both Stewart Public Affairs email address and mine. And I put a note on there too, and I think a lot of you do this anyway, but to please copy your community co-chair Ed on any emails so that he's aware of any traffic that's coming in. Next slide. I put or newly elected co-chair just in case. Next slide. Okay, RAB members, anything else? I sort of did the discussion as we went. Is there anything else on the RAB business? Okay, next slide. I think we're at closing remarks.
Actually, Jennifer, I think,
I'm
has
sorry.
her hand raised.
My apologies. And now I see Chuck's too. Jennifer, go ahead.
Circulation desk in the library car. We can check out any.
I'm having difficulty hearing you, Jennifer. Can you try again?
Sorry, the library is making an announcement.
Oh, gotcha. All right, we'll go to Chuck for a minute then.
Thank you. I just wanted to double check and make sure I understand this. Bill, in your program plans that you are making ahead of time, before the continuing resolution is passed, are you still going to include the $25,000 TAP funds in your program plan?
It is. It's
It
already
is.
there.
It's
Yeah,
what
I have it every
understood
year.
it was last year too, but then we didn't get it done in time.
Right.
So the secret is to get it done in time this coming year.
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Want to make sure I understood that.
Okay. And Jennifer, did you have something else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where it would go in this agenda. I just wanted to make sure, and I'll put it in the chat, which is the Department of Defense Town Hall meeting, which is November 19th, which is a community listening session, which is open to the public.
Thank you for saying that. I meant to put that on there. That is next week, and I did send an email out to all RAB members about that. You should have received that, and I'm happy to send it out again if you'd like. You do need to register for it in advance, which is a matter of clicking a button. And I don't know, I can't recall if there's a due date by which you need to register.
Yeah, so unfortunately the due date to request speaking time was yesterday, but for, I think, general public to just register so they can tap in, you can also write in comments. I think it's important beyond just the RAB. So.
Okay, great. Thanks for bringing that up. I meant to add that to my notes, so I appreciate that oversight. Chuck, did you have another question, or is your hand just still raised?
Sorry, that hand was still raised.
No problem. No problem.
Apologize.
Okay, next slide, please. 7:32, so close. Okay, so just the RAB member closing. As usual, please submit proposed topics and questions for the January meeting to the community co-chair by the end of the month, and that's November 30th. And then any follow-on questions that may be in the process of churning over what we discussed tonight, and you think of a question you didn't have a chance to ask, please submit those to Dan by November 22nd. Jennifer, thank you for putting that link in the chat. So the link to that town hall meeting is in the chat. Next slide, please. Okay, and that's our closing. So the next meeting will be January 29th at the Newburgh Armory, where we usually meet. Any closing remarks from our co-chairs? Colonel McGuire or Ed Lawson, or both?
I just want to thank everyone. Good evening. Nothing from me.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, and I think the very last slide is just some websites that you have probably already seen many times before. Please, if possible, email to all on the email participant list. I can do that, Jennifer. That she's asking me to email out the link to that DoD listening session to the broader email list, and I'll take that as an action and do that tomorrow. All right, with that, I think the last slide says adjourn, I think. Okay, and with that, thanks. I think that is the same. Bill Friedman from EPA just put the link in the website in the chat as well, and I think that is the same link. So thanks for sending that. Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. I know we haven't had an online meeting in quite some time, but I think this went pretty well, and I look forward to seeing you all in person in January. I appreciate your time.
Take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.